The Nick Saban era is over. Enter the Kirby Smart dynasty. The Georgia Bulldogs look to be the face of the SEC and now headlined by one of the most winningest coaches in college football. But it starts off with a major test, even though it is near their own backyard. Played in Atlanta, the Clemson Tigers come on visit. Who is expected to be the favorites to win the national title? How does this game play out, especially with an early kick? Welcome on into SEC Unfiltered. He's Dave Shumate. I'm Cole Thompson, breaking down every single SEC game going into 2024. Because this, ladies and gentlemen, is your new home for SEC coverage. Make sure that you follow us on social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at SEC Unfiltered. Follow us right here. Hit the subscribe button and the ring notification. That way you don't miss a single episode of SECU, because we're talking college football every single day going throughout the 2024 season. Follow us on the podcast forum. Leave a 5-star review if you love this type of content, a 1-star review if you hate this type of content. And to make sure that you keep up with everything SEC related, visit SECUnfiltered.com. This episode's brought to you by RHOBACK. Look good, feel good this upcoming fall on game days with RHOBACK. Use promo code SECU for 20% off all joggers, polos, hoodies, shorts, much, much more. Promo code SECU for the fine fittings from RHOBACK.com. Dave, it is not the same Clemson team of old that we knew as a dominant dynasty underneath Dabo Swinney. Try saying that 5 times fast. But it is still the potent, pristine offense that we expect to belong to the Georgia Bulldogs that might have gotten even better this offseason. Kickoff scheduled at noon inside of course, the Superdome in Atlanta. Major favorites for the number 1 team in the nation going up against still a favorite to be in the running for an ACC title. But of course, we also know that this is kind of a big testament between two coaches. These are 2 of the 3 active names in college football that currently have a national championship attached to their programs. So overall, Dave, we're in for a spectacle.
Cole, don't be calling it the Superdome, brother. You're going to have some Dirty Bird Falcons fans ready to fight you for calling that for the Saints for being in the Superdome. The old Mercedes-Benz, baby, the old dome. But no, I mean, last time we saw this, there was 13 combined points in 21 when they played in Charlotte with the Duke Mayos in
13 points.
Yeah, 10-3 was the final. I think we had a defensive interception. But, I mean, for this game, it feels like a game. You tell me if I'm wrong. I feel like it's a game people, I should say forgotten about, it's not the right word, but just kind of just taken for granted a little bit. It's the noon kick. I think people just automatically assume Georgia's going to win. I mean, I think Georgia's going to win this game. But it is interesting. It's like you said, it kind of feels like, I mean, Clemson, was their first non-10 win regular season since 15, 16 or something? They didn't win 10 games. Yeah. 14. So it feels like people nationally are saying, I mean, it's first world problems. They ended up going 10-3 last year, but kind of going down a little bit. People always get on Dabo about the lack of transfer portal additions. They're having to ask a lot of true freshmen to come in and play probably when they're not ready. I think people think a lot of the athleticism, speed's kind of gone down. I mean, you remember back in their prime, starting from when Sammy Watkins was there in 14 through when Mike Williams was there. They always had difference makers on the outside. Justin Ross, I mean, you name it. They had dudes on the outside that were they could go win their one-on-one matchups. I don't feel like you really see that on Clemson's roster right now. Tyler Brown, sure, fine player. Troy Stellato, fine player. Antonio Williams, Bryant Wesco. I mean, he's a freshman, but he could come in and contribute to it. You don't really see the dudes, the skill guys they had last year. So it'll be interesting. Go ahead.
No, I would agree. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, and then you got Cade Klubnik will be in his 3rd year, 2nd year in the Garrett Riley offensive coordinator position. Remember, everybody, TCU's offensive coordinator, Lincoln Riley's little brother, Garrett Riley, came over. This will be his 2nd year at Clemson. How does he fit into that 2nd year, Cade Klubnik? I mean, he's an Austin, Texas kid, I believe, or if he's a Westlake kid, if I remember right. Yep. So how does that fit in from that standpoint? He reminds me a little bit of, call me crazy here, Cole, a little bit of Bo Nix's trajectory on the way. Is it struggled kind of initially, struggled. Then his last year, I'm not saying it's going to happen this year, but last year kind of took that next step like Nix did in Eugene and Oregon with Will Stein in Oregon. So I don't know. I think we're all kind of waiting to see what they do offensively. It's kind of what we're all waiting to do. And the other question you hear from reading up on Clemson is they do have major question marks on the back end. They can't figure out who's that corner spot. I mean, everybody remembers A.J. Terrell, his little brother, the sophomore, Avian Terrell, who I hear coming out of high school was the better player. I'd have to see it to believe it because I thought Terrell was a pretty damn good player. But Avian Terrell's a guy manning the one spot, but Jaden Lucas is hurt. Who's the other kid I saw? Shelton Lewis, I think, not out for the year, but banged up for a significant. They have major holes. They're already beat up on the back end. To me, this game a little bit, long story short, is kind of strength versus strength, Georgia's offensive line. I think by season's end, Georgia may have the deepest offensive line unit in the league. I think there's a lot of good offensive lines. We previewed one of them just a minute ago in Texas. But I think it could be strength on strength with Georgia's offensive line. We know that is. And Clemson's front with guys like TJ Parker, Devontae Capehart, Peter Woods, Barrett Carter. I think they have a good front. So that's strength on strength. Then it's question mark on question mark a little bit. I think Clemson's is a little more of a bigger one in their secondary. But also Georgia. Who steps up? I mean, you thought RHOBACK Thomas, baby number one, like you mentioned. Is it Colby Young? Is it Colby Young coming over there from Miami? Does Dylan Bell, kind of the versatile gadget Swiss Army knife, does he step up? Arian Smith. I think we forget about this guy at times. Dominic Lovett, who transferred from Missouri 2 years ago. Does he step up? London Humphreys. I think this is a good litmus test for both teams. I think you're going to see the strength on strength, but then you have their two question marks, the receivers, Georgia's receivers and Clemson's secondary going at it. So I'm excited to really see those two matchups break down.
Yeah, you kind of forget about Dominic Lovett because you literally almost forgot what his name was. But let's go ahead and talk about that offensive going into Athens. You get back another guy in Carson Beck. Many people think is the best quarterback in all of college football this year. And he lived up to it last season. It always felt like you were waiting for that it moment, the comeback to reality. It's not going to work out the way that you expect it to. More importantly, he's going to crumble under pressure. And in the high stakes, he delivered time after time after time. Well, it's year two in Mike Bobo's system. You get better at the running back position with the addition of Trevor Etienne. Yes, you did lose some key pieces. Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey are no longer going to be helping you out. But you added in some really good names via the portal. If there has ever been a moment to where Georgia feels like that they have not only the best quarterback in the country, but also potentially a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback on their sidelines, this is the year. Carson Beck has everything at his disposal, and he's only going to be building off of what we saw last season.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. Overall, I mean, I don't know. The line in this game has moved a little. I saw it started like 13.5. Now it's to 14. As we get closer, I kind of like Georgia covering that a little bit. I could see this game starting, I don't know. Who does Georgia get involved in that passing game? Because, again, like we mentioned, they lost Ladd McConkey. They lost Brock Bowers. You're not going to have two of those guys just randomly come up. I think it's got to be by committee. And also, I think we forget about where does the Stanford tight end? I'm excited to see him. I've heard you talk about where does he fit in? Is it Oscar Delp? Is it kind of a combo between them? We forget about Lawson Lucky as well because he gets buried down there as well. So I'm fired up about that. I want to see Ernest Green, the left tackle. I think he could be one of the better offensive linemen in the league this year. So from Georgia, just overall, it sounds like the defense got the best of them in that first scrimmage, Georgia's defense over Georgia's offense. But I don't know. I feel like Georgia's just it's crazy to say, but it really is. I feel like Georgia just out-athletes Clemson a little bit in this game for the most part. I just feel like from top to bottom, I think it's going to be there at half. It'll probably be a one-score game at half. But I think in the second half, Georgia kind of starts the depth. Again, I mentioned Clemson's front seven being good, but the depth isn't there. That's where I could see Georgia's depth on the offensive line. I keep saying the word depth, but I think that's where they kind of start separating and leaning on Clemson late. Maybe take that play-action shot over the top to a guy like Dominic Lovett, Arian Smith, someone like that. It kind of puts the nail in the coffin of that very thin, beat-up Clemson secondary right now.
Let's go ahead and talk about a player that we haven't really mentioned a lot. I have been very high on this edition simply because we know that Georgia loves to run the football. They always have. They always will. It's a staple of just that offense, regardless of who is the head coach, who is the offensive play caller. You look at the laundry list of names that have come through that building that are standouts in the NFL, standouts in college football history, from Herschel Walker to Todd Gurley to even guys that we don't even mention at a high enough level like Keith Marshall. But still, they have great running backs. And honestly, the one thing that I think has been a downfall for the Bulldogs last season was their run game. I wasn't the biggest fan of what you had in the backfield, but I am now. I think that when you look at a talent as Trevor Etienne that's no longer splitting carries with Montreal Johnson at Florida, which also I will say I'm not the biggest fan of that you went and joined your arch rival to go ahead and be the number one guy, but that's college football. It only adds more fuel to the fire. I'm excited now for world's largest outdoor cocktail party, but let's just focus in on this game. To set the tone, I truly believe that this might be the best running back that has walked through Athens, Georgia since we've seen Nick Chubb.
Yeah, similar style to probably who else are we missing here?
DeAndre Swift is probably going to be one you throw on there.
Probably the best guy they've had since Nick Chubb was there. I would agree with that. A kid I like. You're talking about the run game. I think they lacked that explosive run game last year. Dude, the Nate Frazier kid out here is balling out in the fall camp for him. 5'9.5", 206. I'm looking at his track time right now. He's from modern day. Remember, true freshman. Kid ran a 10.5 100-meter. Kid kind of has that little, can get skinny through a hole, can win at all 3 levels. Got a little bit of a smaller, if you go back and watch a little bit of, I'm kind of dating myself here, Mark Ingram back in his day. He's a little twitchier, more fluid through the hips than Mark Ingram was. But that's how you kind of feel, like plays with a good pad level, plays over his toes, going to fall forward, but has that acceleration burst. I think that can, because again, I think what Georgia missed last year was those home run plays at the running back position that you mentioned. Trevor Etienne is going to be able to bring. I think Nate Frazier is going to bring that. And then they're going to bring in the bruiser. I think Roderick Robinson, who's just a freaking tank. So I'm with you. I think Georgia could have probably arguably the best running back room in the conference this year. So I'm fired up about their new additions. Like you said, starting off with their 2 new additions. That, because me and you both know Cole, it is an explosive game now offensively. You're not going to go be 2020 Texas A&M and go have an 11-play drive or you're number 1 on third down efficiency in the country. You can do that. That's just a hard ask in today's. You got to score from far at times. I think Etienne, I'm with you, and Nate Frazier give them that boost of scoring, hitting the home runs from 60, 70 yards out, and not making them have to extend drives. So I'm excited about that.
I'll tell you what, last season, one of the best rushing attacks that wasn't talked about enough was headlined by Jalen Wright in Knoxville, Tennessee. I think you're seeing a very similar skill plus set in Trevor Etienne. You could have a top 10 rushing attack, take a lot of pressure off of this passing game. But we've already mentioned, it just felt like the rich got richer this offseason with every single piece being added. It's like you double down, you hit 21, the dealer bust. That was the transfer portal because you get Colby Young, you get London Humphreys, you keep Dylan Bell, you keep Oscar Delp, you get Ben Urasek coming over from Stanford. By the way, if you have not spent a good Friday night, 3 o'clock in the morning, can't fall asleep, you want to dream of nightmare matchups, go turn on his Stanford tape last year. He was the one beauty of Palo Alto Cardinal football. They have weapons and dudes and studs, but I do want to mention this. As much as they do have weapons in Athens, they have weapons in Clemson, South Carolina. It's unproven weapons. It's a lot of unknown, but they do have weapons. They went out and they made sure that they were going to land one wide receiver that finally would get them back to the level of what we know about wide receiver U, Clemson Tiger football. They went and they brought in Bryant Wesco. They went and they brought in TJ Moore. Both of them were 4 stars. Some were even considered some even considered more a 5-star. They may have to step up really big this year. They still have Antonio Williams on the roster. And here's the other part that's really important. The way that we've continued to hear people talk about Peyton Thorne down at Auburn, Alabama, where it's another year in the system, it's another year to kind of learn underneath this offense. He gets the spring football. He feels more comfortable with his personnel. Is there any scenario where maybe that's the same thing for a guy like Cade Klubnik, where we get another year of him having plays alongside in the playbook of Garrett Riley? There's a bit more familiarity. He has that relationship to where he's already thrust in the starting role, but he's gained that confidence. The offensive line is a little bit more protected. And so now we're envisioning an actual Clemson Tiger team that is probably not going to win a national title, but they're damn sure going to be a threat in the playoff.
Yeah, they should be pretty good up front. Remember, hey, we got former Ole Miss head coach and Georgia offensive line coach Matt Luke's the offensive line coach.
Which is one of the best hires of the offseason.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Clemson's got about 4 starters. That center spot they're still trying to figure out. I think that's a competition right now. So they should be good up front. I think another guy, you mentioned a good point, Clay. I think Cole, I think Cade Klubnik in that second year with Garrett Riley will really help. But honestly, the tight end we hadn't talked about. I think he could be a weapon for them that we hadn't seen. The Jake Brunenstuhl. I think he's one of their better tight ends they've had in Clemson history historically. I think he had went for 850 last year, 10 touchdowns, something like that. He'll be a weapon, especially in the red zone. That'll be someone Georgia, Glenn Schumann, and then will have to key on who's manning that nickel spot, covering him, what linebackers, C.J. Allen, Small Munden, Raylan Wilson, somebody covering him. That could be a matchup I could see Garrett Riley trying to take advantage of. But, yeah, I mean, do they lean on the offense? Clemson's game plan in this game will be interesting because you go lean on like Phil Maffa, the running back with 4 starters returning on the offensive line. But you just – and Georgia was – they were vulnerable on the interior last year. I mean, they weren't near. Now, I think some of that is their tight mid front. They were willing to give some of that up. But again, they're waiting for a big guy to step up. Georgia on the interior is your Stackhouse, Warren Brinson coming off injury. I think they'll have him. They're just saving him a little bit. I think Michael Williams is going to fluctuate all over, could line up in a 3 way outside. Yeah, I think they're doing that for his benefit. Also, can Georgia generate a pass rush with just 4 without blitzing? Chaz Chambliss is the vet. I'm hearing improvement a little bit. I think he's got some soft tissue injury. But last year, that was a little bit of an issue. They had Damon Wilson, who was really just a third down specialist they bring in. But they didn't have an every down guy that you're like, yeah, we're not having to bring that 5th or 6th guy. We can go get a pass rush on 4th. That could be key for Cade Klubnik as well, especially if they could establish the run with Phil Maffa early and it won't allow Georgia to blitz. So that'll be key. I'm actually really interested now. We're talking about the Garrett. What is Garrett Riley's initial game plan coming to this thing? How do they get started offensively? It feels like do we kind of go attack? The weakness was last year. I don't think it's going to be that this year though. Or do you start kind of using in the intermediate game, getting that tight end out there? Now I think Georgia would adjust to that and take that away, but it'll be interesting how they attack initially. I just don't think long term in this game Clemson has enough offensive answers to go beat Georgia just straight up when the clock hits 000 in the 4th quarter, or probably around 3:30, 4 o'clock Eastern on August 31st.
You got some young players on both sides of the football, mostly on the offensive side. Jay Haynes, the redshirt freshman at running back behind Maffa. You also got, again, we mentioned TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco. And the problem is that on the opposing side, you got a veteran leader at every level of the defensive field. You have Malachi Starks on the back end. Of course, we've already talked about what you get with a guy in Michael Williams coming off the edge. And at middle linebacker, one of the biggest breakout stars of 2024 was CJ Allen. 2023 was CJ Allen. So all 3 are going to be major studs. But let me ask you, Dave, before we move on and give our predictions, one player you are most excited to see from Georgia's offense or defense in this game?
Well, I mentioned him earlier. Nate Frazier would be one, but I think they kind of ease him in because, again, I think all these guys are going to start getting ready for these 4 or 5 extra games. Teams like Georgia, Texas, we're talking about, who think they're legitimately going to go play for a national championship and for good reason. So I mentioned Nate Frazier. So giving you another name, you mentioned him early. Offensively, yeah, I want to see who steps up at wide receiver 1. Colby Young, the Miami transfer, is a guy that stands out initially. I wanted to say Dylan Bell. I'm going to go Colby Young on offense because they need that wide receiver 1 to step up. There's going to be plays to be made because I think Clemson secondary is so thin. I mean, the only sure thing they got going on in their secondary is the Terrell kid out there. Is, like I said, A.J. Terrell's little brother, Avion Terrell. So I think that's the only for sure thing out there. Everybody else, it seems like it's kind of toss up or they're banged up a little bit. And then on defense, just giving you another name for Georgia. Dude, call me crazy. I think we know what we're going to see with Michael Williams. I want to see I want to see a guy like Jonell Aguero, the star, the nickel spot. I think he's going to change that whole secondary on the back end if he can stay in that star nickel spot for Georgia. Because, again, they're waiting on that. Who's that other safety next to Malachi Starks? Is it Dan Jackson, who's got the more experienced cerebral guy? Is it KJ Bolden, the freshman phenom? He's going to play. But, again, at that safety position at Georgia, we all know you got to be able to communicate. That's asking a lot for a true freshman in his first game against an opponent in opposition like Clemson to go out there and be able to communicate that effectively. It'll come, but I don't know if it's there in the first game. That's why I think Jonell Aguero is going to be key in this game. And then obviously 11 other games, 13, 14, 15 that Georgia's probably going to go play. So I'm excited to see him at the star spot.
I've already said this before. I think that Ben Urisic is the ideal position that you want to replace a guy like Brock Bowers. I called him Kirkland brand Brock Bowers. It was one of the best moves made of the offseason. You're not going to be able to replace number 19, a 2-time John Mackey Award winner. But if you had to go with somebody that could easily step up, I think the kid from Stanford is about ready to show the world why. Last season, there were many people saying he was going to be one of the top tight ends drafted in 2024. Decided to come back. Now he's going to play for a national championship more than likely. Defensively, I'm actually going to say KJ Bolden. I think that there is some value about having a young safety that is not afraid to step up, demand excellence, be willing to call some plays, be willing to add a little bit of that voice into the back end. You remember when Malachi Starks came onto campus? They did not fear putting him out there. There were some questions. They certainly were a little bit hesitant when it came to his overall play style, but they had no fear saying if we have to play him this season, he's going to be prepared. And so when you go up against Clemson, a team that may be a rematch later on in the playoffs, if things go a certain way, you're going to have to go and play up to that level of competition. And this is a good litmus test to see where he is. So I want to see when he's not going up against players in practice and he doesn't have to hide holding back that hammer. He can deliver the crushing blow. He can play in coverage. He can make some plays on the back end and be physical with some wide receivers where he's not going to be penalized in practice. How does that factor in with Malachi Starks? Because of, once again, Stark this year is probably going to be the best safety that goes to the NFL draft. I would say that you got to have a replacement going into 2025. KJ Bolden is that guy. Can he step up right away? Dave, there have been over 60 matches between these two teams. All time, Georgia has the 43-18-4 victory. They're currently on a 2-game win streak. The betting lines, -14 going into this game, over under set at 48.5. Make your claim.
Yeah,
Both hit, both under.
I don't think Clemson is going to have the offensive answers to really go put up a ton of points on Georgia. I could see them putting up more yards than people anticipate. But again, that's one of the more overrated stats, total yards in college football now. But I think the real thing I'm going to be looking on is who steps up as an offensive playmaker for Georgia. I think they have them. I just want to see who it is, especially really kind of looking at that wide receiver spot. I'm like you. I think big day for Trevor Etienne, big day for Carson Beck. I think the offensive line is going to prove it's one of the best offensive lines, top 2 or 3, if not the first in the country. I think this is a game and a half, but I think the depth, I think Georgia starts to lean on Clemson in the second half. They overpower that front seven that does lack some depth, and I think they take their shots off play action. I think it's going to be something like 34-13 is going to be that final.
We're close. I will say that, but let me just go ahead and set the tone. 2 years ago, Dan Lanning marched into Atlanta to face off against his former boss, and that year, they still had a dominant season. They were fantastic. They finished with 11 wins on the season. You get Bo Nix to come back for another year. And everyone focuses in on not that loss, but what happened because of that loss. I feel like that's Clemson this year. That Clemson is going to be one of those teams that eventually we will see in Charlotte. We will see them potentially in the college football playoff. They'll be one of the 12 best rosters. You'll get that enigma and that inertia drive from Cade Klubnik. You'll see these wide receivers step up. You'll see a good run game. You'll see this defense be physical as all hell in the ACC. They will be right back in the conversation as a legit threat to go ahead and make it to the dance. It's just not going to happen in this game. That's ultimately what I think comes down to it. I think that you will see a good rushing attack headlined by Trevor Etienne. I think Ben Urasek is going to be the guy that we talk about the game's end as the new breakout player. I think this defense is going to be able to feast on Cade Klubnik, make some mistakes. I think KJ Bolden has a good performance in the third quarter. I'm going to go 38-17. I do think that they will hit the over. I do think that they will cover the spread. Ultimately, this is a game that I think doesn't define either program in their respective conferences, but this is just a game where it's physical on physical. You come out on top if you are Georgia.
Yeah, if you're Clemson, you'd agree with me here, Cole. I think don't go get embarrassed because it could hurt you down the line in that playoff committee if you were trying to get in and be maybe a second. I don't think the ACC gets 3 teams, but if you're trying to get that second team, show a competitive first game. And again, me and you score predictions don't predict blowouts, but that would kind of be if you're Clemson, hey, go out there. Let's see. Because I think most realistic Clemson fans know they're probably not expecting to go win this game. But hey, let's go look like we can go contend for the ACC. And for Georgia, yeah, I mean, they kind of think it's revenge tour season. They got some question marks, but hey, that's first world problems in Athens for a lot of programs.
It won't be a rematch of what we saw a few years ago in Charlotte, but this will be a game that I think does have major implications of the college football playoff. He's Dave Shumate. I'm Cole Thompson. Make sure that you hit subscribe down below. That way you don't miss a single episode, preview, or any content found at your new home for SEC Unfiltered and the home of the SEC content. Make sure that you're following us on the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at SEC Unfiltered. Follow Dave on Twitter, at Mock10Sports. Follow me on Twitter, at Mr. Cole Thompson. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. And to keep up with the #1 source for all things SEC, visit SECunfiltered.com. Until next time, he's Dave Shumate. I'm Cole Thompson. Later.